Good morning, Emmanuel, and good morning to those that are watching virtually. Our 1045 worship experience in a different way. So we are excited this morning to have Meredith Neubauer. Did I say it correctly? And she says, everybody knows her. So she's part of our congregation, and she's going to share with us a very important topic, which is about inclusive language, and that it matters to our congregation, to Emmanuel United Methodist Church. So I want to welcome all of you that are watching and those that are here. So we're grateful that you're here. I would like to open with a prayer, and then as we center ourselves in the mission and ministry of this congregation in a new way. Dear God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day. We take time, Lord, to center ourselves, for the opportunity to gather in community, and for the ways you called us and invite us to stretch ourselves in new ways, to really be a radical, inclusive, hospitable congregation, to invite all people to experience your grace. I give you thanks for Meredith, for her presence in our congregation, for her membership, and for the way she loved this congregation as well. And I ask that you be with her as she shared this morning, and allow for this opportunity for all of us to grow in our discipleship in a new way. So be with us. Those that are on their way, bring them safely. But most of all, Lord, we want to honor you and give you glory. So be with us this morning, and we pray this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. And without further ado, we're going to move into the topic of the day. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? Okay, this is going to be interactive. That's what makes it work. So, my name is Meredith Neubauer. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And for anyone who may need a visual description, I describe myself as a very pale white woman with short auburn hair. I am wearing a black and white checkered dress with boots and wearing blue glasses. So that's how we tend to open up our meetings at work so that everyone feels a bit included. I want to start by really thanking you all for letting me be here. I'm going to give you the origin story of how this happened, but I've been giving this presentation for about over a year now, and one of the things I say is that this is how I try to live my life. So it's not just a work thing. And I asked to be able to give this presentation to put that phrase for me into motion, right? I'm trying to live my life, so I'm trying to take this to the people. I'm taking it outside of the work environment and bringing it here. So, how did this get started? I work at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Rockville. I started in June of 2020, which means I started pretty much at the beginning of the pandemic. I knew exactly 3 people. Those 3 people were the ones that I interviewed with in person in March of 2020, the day that DC shut down. So I work in the Civil Rights Department. I process complaints of discrimination for employees. So if someone came to my office or approached me virtually, however they wanted to do it, and say, I've been discriminated because of blank. That could be their race, their sex, their national origin, their religion, anything. And when someone comes into my office and say that they've been discriminated against on that basis, we accept people as they identify themselves. So unfortunately, I was running into a problem. I didn't know anybody, right? I knew the 3 people I interviewed with. So I was supposed to make a determination on these discrimination complaints based on the person's name. And we were addressing their letters as Mr. or Ms. so-and-so. But that was a problem because, again, I don't know these people. There are gender-neutral names out there. My name, actually, Meredith, is considered a gender-neutral name. Before the 1950s, Meredith was traditionally a male name. And after that, it became more of a female name. But if you Google my name, it says that it is gender neutral. So how am I supposed to know if Meredith is a Mr. or a Ms.? And then it also presents a different problem. Maybe Meredith doesn't identify as either male or female, but instead as someone who is gender non-binary. So we shouldn't be making assumptions based on someone's name. So I took this to my coworkers who were instantly on board. I said, I just want to make a small change. All I want to do, instead of saying Mr. Sue Hill or Ms. Sue Hill, I'm just going to say Dear Sue Hill. Takes it all out of there, right? It removes the assumptions. Instead of using someone's pronouns that I don't know that that's the pronouns that they use, we're going to switch to they, them. Took it to my coworkers, they loved it. We had a meeting with my management. Before that meeting was even over, my management is messaging people saying, we're going to do this. This is what we want to do. Help us. And of course, nothing in the government moves very quickly, right? It just doesn't. That's a fact. So it did take a little bit of time, but we coordinated with other offices and we got to make this determination that we are changing all of our correspondence to gender neutral. And that was a great thing. In the meantime, one of the groups that we had reached out to, a person approached me and she said, hey, I want to expand this beyond gender neutral language and talk about inclusive language in all different aspects. Would you like to do this with me? I said, sure. So we did an announcement. We reached out to anybody in the agency. We called for volunteers. Do you want to be a part of this? We got 18 people. Since then, our group has grown to about 25 people. And what we did in our spare time, not that we have a lot of it, but we created this presentation, we created materials, we created a website, and we started presenting at offices when they would ask us to come. And from there, we then presented all last year to managers and supervisors in the agency. And late last year, we finally held a presentation for anyone in the agency who wanted to learn about this. We had about 100 people attend. We plan to, in this upcoming year, change not just this presentation, but expand it for people. Because I will talk about things that you can do in your writing, but it's also things that you can do in your oral communication. And it's really not just work communication, it's your everyday communication with others. So we will be doing some things like showing people how to open meetings. We're going to take some actual materials that the Regulatory Commission produces. We're going to change it, and we're going to use inclusive language, and we're going to have people go through those examples. So our goal is really just to encourage people to use inclusive language where possible. So we're not the grammar police. I'm not the grammar police. I'm not the political correctness police. I am just simply someone who is here today to challenge you and to ask you to listen with an open mind, absorb this, and determine whether or not this is something that you want to try in your everyday life as well. So why does inclusive language matter? And this is some of the views of our volunteers. Because it makes everyone feel included, welcomed, and recognized that they are just as important as the person next to you. It sets the stage for respect and openness, and feeling welcome and included makes people want to contribute to the conversation as a valued member of the team. And inclusive language, this is very important, this is one of the most important ones to me, avoids perpetrating prejudicial beliefs or demeaning attitudes. And so we're going to see some examples of how we can change our regular language into something more inclusive. And all you got to do is just change a couple of words. You just got to think about it for a second and then just change a couple of words. So what is inclusive language? It is bias-free language that uses expressions, words, and terms that are likely to be perceived as neutral, understandable, and welcoming by everyone, regardless of their gender, race, religion, age, national origin, etc. Here are the principles of inclusive language. And the first one at the top, I hope you all can see this, use people first. So the general rule, the one that I learned growing up, was treat others as you want to be treated. I'm here today to tell you I think that there's a better way to do that. You want to treat others as they want to be treated. So if someone comes up to you or talks to you and you know this person and they say, hey, I identify as blank, as a form of respect, you would accept what they identify as. And so that's the first and probably most important principle of inclusive language. Avoiding stereotypes. We're going to talk about some of those today, and I think we do a good job as a congregation of doing this, but it's also important to kind of know some historical context, and I'll tell you, if you Google some of the phrases that we use on a day-to-day basis, they do not have good history. It's not good stuff. Be specific to the individual. We already talked about that. Use universal language. This is going to be important. We're going to go through some examples. I think it's even on the next slide. And we're going to talk about how some language, based on a person's culture, on their upbringing, where they're from, may be different. And so we're going to try to use universal language. And the last one is be self-aware. And we're going to discuss that. I'm very open that this is a challenge for me too. I will tell you the ones that I am working on pretty hard in my life right now. But we are human. We're going to make mistakes. Be self-aware of those mistakes, figure out how to correct it, and then you're going to move on. So, on the next slide here, why are these statements not inclusive? This is where we're all going to interact. This is it. So the first one, if a master data node fails, the system can switch to one of the slave nodes. Why is this not inclusive? That's right, master slave. In my life, I generally try not to refer to anything as master slave. I just don't think it's really necessary unless we're actually talking about American history. This is a term, this is pretty much used a lot in the IT world. So, but there are alternatives. Instead of saying master slave, you could say primary or secondary, or parent or child. And within the IT field, there is a lot of changes that are trying to move away from that kind of language, and they are replacing it with primary and secondary. The next one says, standardization establishes the baseline mindset, and without it, forward progress is handicapped. So what's not inclusive there? Exactly. What can we use instead of handicapped? What could we say? Challenged? Accessible? I think here they're trying to say more forward progress is maybe slowed, so maybe challenged would work as well. Anything else that we could probably say? Delayed? Yeah, absolutely. We have a blacklist of vendors we cannot use. Instead, refer to the whitelist of approved contractors. Anybody got anything here? Blacklist and whitelist, right. What could we use instead? You could say that. You could say a list of vendors that we cannot use. You could also say we have a list of excluded vendors. That would be fine too. We're going to talk about why. I think you all are getting the point here, but you notice none of these are traditionally like quote unquote bad words, right? They're not slurs or anything like that. It's just language that we could improve upon. And so for this particular one, we are assuming whiteness to be the default, right? Whiteness to be good, blacklist is bad. All right, the next one, this one's actually one of my favorites. We want all citizens around the nuclear power plants to be aware of emergency levels. Citizens, if something's going on with a nuclear power plant, do we really care if the people are citizens or not? I don't think so. I think we're going to just care about the entire community. So be mindful of citizens versus undocumented individuals, and why would we want to just only care about the citizens? He was Monday morning quarterbacking in the staff meeting. Quarterbacking, okay. Why is this not inclusive? I'm sorry, I can't. Actually, that's not why we use that as an example. But I'll take it. It's good to see you. Anybody else? I got to tell you, this one isn't my favorite one. Who here, please feel comfortable, you're in a safe space. Who here is not a sports fan? Okay. So you all may not follow football. You might not know exactly what the terms are in football, right? Who here knows someone who is from another country? or is not from the United States. In those other countries, what is football? Soccer, right? So if you have people in your audience or in your conversation who weren't born in the US, Monday morning quarterbacking might not mean a thing to them, right? So they have no idea what you are saying. I use a lot of sports analogies in my life. This is very hard for me, but it is given as an example that not everyone knows sports. People might not know what it means when I say, I feel like we're in the ninth inning. It's just a thing. There's also some golf analogies that I actually personally don't know, but this was shown as an example of just being mindful of who your audience is, who you're having those conversations with. I make reference to yellow flags and red flags a lot, but for people who don't watch sports, they may have no idea what that means. So, we're going to go back to some more detailed explanation of what the general principles of inclusive language is after having gone through those examples. Being specific helps avoid unintended bias. Using the term man to refer to human beings is not specific. We have, for example, the head of our agency is a chairman. His name is Christopher Hansen. And recently, he has decided to move to the term chair. Why? Because we don't need to say chairman. When the head of the agency was a woman, she went by chairman. Why? It's not necessary. So instead of postman, we could just say postal worker. Exact ages is better than a vague older people. And Chinese Americans is more accurate than Asian Americans. A person's specific orientation is more accurate than a general term such as gay. But this is all going to lead into the second point here. Use only relevant characteristics. So is it important to say that someone is a Chinese American if you're referring to George that works over in this department? Is it necessary for you to say to me, oh, he's Chinese? Probably not, right? Is it important to refer to someone's age when telling me a story about that person? So think about what is relevant to the conversation. Now, if it is relevant to explain that George is Chinese for some reason, okay, then use the term Chinese as opposed to Asian. And that's only if that is what that person wants to be identified as. But also, think about, is it important that a woman is attractive when you're telling a story, or that a man is hefty, or that a person is well-dressed? How about the term well-spoken? Let's do away with well-spoken, right? Is it relevant to say, oh, so-and-so, they're so well-spoken? Probably not. That's not being inclusive. Judy, you had your hand up. No? You good? Okay. Become sensitive to the historical context or a lack of general understanding behind phrases that you find common. I'm going to give you some examples. You may be very surprised. I know that I was. You may not. You may know the historical context, but a lot of our sayings and slangs and things either have different meanings to different cultures or are entrenched in, like I said, some not so good history. And finally, as I talked about, be humanity focused. So we have gotten some pushback when I do this presentation at work at times. And people are like, well, is this just another set of rules that I have to remember? Like, is this something I have to do? And I said, no. And as I opened this presentation, I just said it takes some intentional focus and perspective. There are some terms that we use in everyday language. I'll give myself a spoiler. The term guys to refer to women and men or a group of individuals, that's not inclusive. It's very hard for people to stop saying guys. And that is one of the terms that I am working on. Instead of guys, I say everyone. I say y'all. People say folks. But there's a way to do that to be gender neutral instead of using the term guys. and it takes my intentional focus and perspective. Some topic areas to pay attention to are ability and disability, age, nationality, gender and sexuality, race, ethnic origin, and religion. We've talked about these. So I'm going to go a little more in depth on all of them. So we're going to start with ability and disability. And again, I think I've said this probably at least 4 times already, but it is important to go with how the person wishes to be identified, right? How that person explains who they are. And I say this because when we were doing the research for ability and disability, a lot of people within this community are very split. And so you may have some individuals who want to be referred to or described in a certain way, whereas others may be the exact opposite. But you want to avoid describing people as disabled, handicapped, or confined to a wheelchair. The historical context of handicap originally comes from a game called Hand in Cap, which was a game of chance, which every person would have an equal chance of winning or succeeding in that game that was being played. Later, it was applied to horse racing, and you would handicap a fast horse by hanging stones on it to slow it down. It then became, through the late 19th century, to be applied with people with disabilities, and it always occurred in the phrase, handicapped in the race for life, handicapped in the struggle of existence. It was very much tied to the competitive social evolutionist worldview that was ubiquitous in the 19th century. So by calling someone handicapped, we're automatically implying that they cannot succeed at life. Instead of even saying handicap parking space or handicap bathroom or handicap stall, I'm actually just using the term ADA now for the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I will say ADA parking space, ADA stall. I actually learned that just a few weeks ago at a wedding. Someone had said that, and I was like, you know what? That makes perfect sense. That's what I'm going to use. Avoid terms that contribute to stigmas around disability or mental illness. Crazy, dumb, lame, insane, psycho. I'll even add nuts. Those are words that we kind of use commonplace, maybe not insane or psycho, but I'll say you're driving me crazy, right? If we are going to remove the stigma around mental illness, we need to be identifying the mental illness for what it is and talking about it in a positive way, because lots of people have mental illness. And so we need to kind of erase these words from our being that give it a negative connotation. Avoid saying someone suffers from a disability. I actually had used that in an example in another training presentation that I had given. I didn't even realize that I had put someone suffers from a disability. I received an email from a gentleman who was deaf, and he said, I don't look at my disability as something that I suffer from. And it was a very good point. He said, this just makes me different, and I have a different path in this life. And I said, you know what, you were absolutely right, and I apologized profusely and immediately took it out of the presentation. Avoid terms that contribute to stigmas around sensory disabilities, blind spot or tone deaf. I know that we use blind spot a lot of times to say something that you possibly missed. But by doing that, we are referencing someone with a disability. Take a people-first approach, an adult who uses a wheelchair versus a wheelchair user, a person who is hard of hearing versus a deaf person. Anybody here listen to Lizzo or Beyonce? Anybody? So I don't know if you all know this. You probably read it. I like to be up on my pop culture. But Lizzo and Beyonce both came out with songs that contained the word spaz. Here in the United States, spaz is typically slang for meaning to freak out, right? But spaz over in the UK and other parts of Europe is a derogatory term for someone with cerebral palsy. So a lot of people flipped out on Beyonce and Lizzo for using this word in their songs. They both apologized for their mistake, said that they were not aware, and they made different language in their songs. They changed the words and sent the song back out into the world. And that just goes to show that one term here that can have one meaning, again, can have a very different meaning to someone with a different culture or a different background. Age and nationality. Avoid referring to someone's age unless it is relevant to what you are writing about or even having a conversation about. Do not use women or older relatives as a substitute for novice or beginner. And this phrase is terrible. For example, don't say something so simple your grandmother can do it. I've never heard somebody say that phrase to me, but I'm pretty sure if they do, I'm going to have to say something right then and there. And as we talked about, avoid using citizen as a generic term for people. Instead, use people, the public, users, residents, or folks. A lot of times, at least to me in my everyday life, it really doesn't matter to me whether someone's a citizen or not. And it's not on here, but I do feel the need to say, please stop referring to people as illegal aliens. Just stop calling people aliens. That's, if you want to, you could use the term undocumented. But please, let's not call people aliens anymore. Yes. 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 And it typically takes the government, I feel like I'm in a position I can say this. I feel like it takes the government a bit longer to catch up with the rest of society sometimes in some of these areas. Because I know on their forms it used to check and it would say illegal alien or something. Non-resident is fine. I think that's okay. We need to stop referring to human beings as aliens. Hmm. Oh, sure, certainly. And like I said, this takes focus. It takes, some perspective, and some of this challenges the way that we were raised and what we think of. And so some people are more willing to change that mindset than others. I had a couple other examples here that weren't actually on the slide. The term gypped. Have you ever heard, oh, you gypped me? So it means to be defrauded or swindled or cheated. Does anybody have an idea of where that comes from? Gypsy. I heard gypsy. Yes, yes. It was formed from gypsy, which is a derogatory term for Roma. And so just by using that word, we're not listening to that historical context of where that word came from. How about off the reservation? So off the reservation means to deviate from what is expected or customary. In the 1800s, the federal government forcibly removed Native Americans from their land and sent them to live in designated reservations. I know everybody knows that. The phrase off the reservation was used in government correspondence to report on whether Native Americans were complying with the orders to stay within those designated living areas. Over time, it came to be used to describe anyone acting outside of what is expected, particularly in political situations. What could we use here instead? Outside the box would work. I like went rogue or go rogue. That's one of my favorite phrases. But these are just some of the things to think about, like what I'm talking about with this historical context. Race, ethnicity, and religion. Avoid using words, images, or situations that reinforce racial, ethnic, or religious stereotypes. Avoid the term non-white or other terms that treat whiteness as a default. And we talked about that with the blacklist and whitelist. Don't make assumptions. I've said this time and time again. Ask people how they identify themselves and be aware of complexities within racial, ethnic, and religious identities. For example, not all Arabs are Muslims, and many nationalities and ethnicities include various religious practices and traditions. I like to ask people, so I ask people how they would describe themselves. I ask where they're from. I do this in a context, in a way, I think tone matters a lot, that invites people to tell me about themselves and tell me about their culture. And it's a great thing to do because then I'm learning, right? And so I'm not coming in with any judgments. I'm asking and I want to learn. But I also don't assume. So, and really here, there are people, for example, one of my best friends, she describes herself as an Afro-Latina. So she doesn't identify as much as the country that she comes from, but she likes to be referred to as an Afro-Latina. I had a former boss who was very proud to be Mexican. And so if you ask someone how they describe themselves, you don't make those assumptions and you just use what they're telling you. Thank you. I try. Yeah, yes. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I don't ever just say so what are you? I think by just saying what are you, I think that already sets the tone, right? So no. I think there's better ways to go about that. And I think, if someone does not want to be the person that educates me on various things, that's absolutely fine. And we need to accept that too, because it can be very tiring for people who feel that they have to be the representative of XYZ. And so I also will tell you, Google is your friend. If you want to learn more about various things, Google is your friend. When referring to a person's race or ethnicity, use adjectives, not nouns. For example, a Hispanic person, not a Hispanic. But again, here, this is where some of this individualism is going to come into play, right? I have a friend who is Jewish. He refers to himself and wants me to refer to him as a Jew. And that's fine. That's what he wants. And so that's what I'm going to respect. I used also the term ghetto here because a lot of people will say, oh, that's ghetto, right? Or, oh, she's so ghetto, whatever. We really shouldn't be saying that. Does anybody know where the term ghetto comes from? I can't hear you. I'm so sorry. Right. Right. So exactly. It was where Jews were forced to live in the late 1800s, beginning with that. It went on to refer to a section of the city, especially a thickly populated slum area, inhabited by members primarily of an ethnic or minority group, often a result of social or economic restrictions. So when you say that now, even when you're talking about a place, you're making a judgment on that area, right? And by making that judgment, you are reinforcing a stereotype. How about the term grandfathered in? Anybody got anything on this one? This one was a little new to me. Any ideas? It was about the Voting Rights Act. I'm so glad you're here. Grandfathered in. It means when people or companies are allowed to continue following an existing set of rules or even after new rules are put in place. So even after the 15th Amendment was passed in 1870s, giving Black Americans, men, the right to vote, a number of states instituted poll taxes and literacy tests to make voting more difficult for Black people. This was a way around an outright ban on black voting, which had become illegal. But several states passed a law known as the Grandfather Clause, saying that if you could vote before the 15th Amendment was passed, or were a lineal descendant of a voter, you didn't have to take the tests or pay the toll tax. In other words, if you were white, you were grandfathered in to being allowed to vote. So what can we use instead of grandfathered in? Pre-approved? I'll take that. How about exempted? Excused or legacied in? So I will tell you, I did not know about being grandfathered in. That is something that we hear quite often. Never use it again. Promise you that. Here's one. In fairness, I don't hear people saying this, but I thought it was a good example. How about sold down the river? In fairness, I've never had somebody say that to me. So, but the phrase has long been synonymous with betrayal, but you should avoid using it because it probably originated as an allusion to selling enslaved people and transporting them down the Mississippi River. And the phrase was first recorded in the 1800s. Oops. Gender and sex. And I will tell you, this is where most of the conversation at my work happens, but really inclusive language, again, is just more, it encompasses more than gender and sex. But avoid using the presumptions of a heteronormative audience. Instead of presuming that a man has a wife or a girlfriend and a woman has a husband or boyfriend, use spouse or significant other. This is something that I am working on right now. I really like this one. And the reason being, if I am in a group of people, and let's say we don't all know each other, if I use the term spouse, the person next to me would probably be more comfortable also using spouse. And that way, that person doesn't feel the obligation to out themselves as being married to a person of the same sex, or even being in a non-marriage and just living with someone. We're taking that pressure off of that person to have to give more details than they're willing to do. So by saying spouse, I'm being gender neutral. I may say he, later on, because, everybody here, I think, knows Davin. Everyone knows my husband. But I don't necessarily have to say husband. I can simply say spouse. And that tells you I'm married. And I don't think that there's really anything more you really need to know there. And by saying spouse, I'm making someone else in that audience possibly more comfortable. And I think that's very important. So I'm really trying to use that one. That's one that I'm working on, keeping very cognizant of it. And I'll tell you, I've been watching Australian reality TV because the US just doesn't have enough for me at this point. And in Australia, people refer to their spouses and partners and everything else as partner. Everybody does it. And I think that's so great because it takes the pressure off everybody else. They just say partner. My partner is so-and-so. Instead of sexual preference, use sexual orientation or sexuality. Sexual orientation is not a choice. I think everybody here knows this. I'm very proud of this congregation. Use sexual orientation or sexuality. Avoid terms that, while generally accepted in society, are male-dominated or male-focused. When referring to a group of people, don't use guys or ladies and gentlemen. Instead, say all, team, everyone, folks. I'm going to ask y'all, why do you think ladies and gentlemen is something that we're telling you to avoid? I can't hear you with the mask on. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's why I opened it up with saying, good morning, how's everyone doing? Because I don't want to make a presumption about anyone. Phrases like best man for the job. I personally hate that phrase. Why? I am not a man. Sometimes I am the best person for the job. Should be avoided. Use best qualified person. When referring to the workforce, use labor, personnel, staff, or employees instead of manpower. I actually told Davin at one point when the chair made this announcement that he was no longer going by chairman, but instead chair. And it was a surprise to us. And the inclusive language ambassadors were mentioned. So it was a big day. So I actually looked at Davin and I was like, I'm going to erase man from everything. Like, man is gone. And I just got the look that Davin usually gives me. But it's true. I personally, this is just me, and it's not gender neutral, and I think we need to come up with a term for it, but I'm not saying history anymore. I'm saying herstory. Like, that's where I'm at. If we can come up with a gender neutral one, I will use it. And again, respect how a person wishes to be dressed or referred to. And the suggestion is to open a meeting by each person introducing themselves with their pronouns. So that's what I did, right? When I opened the meeting, I told you who I was. I gave you my pronouns, and then I gave a visual description for anyone who may need it. So inclusive language and inclusive actions is going to speak a lot to the people that you're talking to. And this is where I said, I'm going to challenge some of the way you were raised, the way that I was raised, the way that we do some of these things. Look what is on here as terms to avoid. Ma'am and sir. That is very hard for me. I do say ma'am, I do say sir. I will say thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. I don't say guys and girls too often, but I have a very good friend at my work who is gender non-binary, and they are also an inclusive language ambassador. And we were on a phone call, and I said, thank you, sir, right before we hung up. And I automatically did the face palm. I was like, oh, why did you do that? Because it was so ingrained in me to do that. And I didn't take 2 seconds to think about what I was doing, right? So instantly had to type out the apology. And I'll tell you what, I've never done it since. It happens. We're going to make mistakes. We are human. We are in this awkward choreography called life. And it's going to happen. What all we're asking is to take those 2 seconds, think about it. And sometimes with some of these terms, I think it's going to be harder for us than others. So instead of these terms, ladies, gentlemen, etc., good morning, folks, hi there. I frequently will start an email or a letter with hi there instead of saying, good morning, ma'am or sir, whatever. Hi, everyone. Hi, friends. How are y'all doing? Pittsburgh people, I gave you a shout out here with the yins and yuns. And I don't usually give Pittsburgh many shout outs. How is everyone doing? Can I get you all something? So just using the term all. I personally am not a folks person, but some people love the word folks. Folks is fine. By shifting to this gender neutral language, we are being gender inclusive. We are shifting away from the binary and accepting that there may be some non-conforming, non-binary people in our audience. Yes, Sue. Hun, you got to be careful with hun, though, in the workplace because, I deal with the harassment cases, too. So, know your audience, know your friends. You can always call me hun. We good there. But definitely the workplace, I tell people not to do that. Somebody else had a hand up. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Absolutely. Hmm. Let me ask you this though. Do you know how I feel about being called ma'am? Right. Right. So that's what you need to know. That's where it gets tricky, right? Hmm. Yeah, words change. Language evolves. Hmm. But I think too, though, I think you may think you know how some people would like these terms, while you don't. Georgette, you had your hand up. Absolutely. Absolutely. I hate the term ma'am. I really do. I was raised to say it. I don't ever want to be called ma'am. That makes me feel really old, actually, and I'm not there in this world. I'm not there in life. And my mom's watching on the live stream, and I was talking about some of these concepts with her this week, and she also struggled with a bit of it. And I just looked at her. I was like, "Do you want to be called ma'am? Like, how do you feel when people call you ma'am?" And she got real quiet and she was like, "Well, it used to be used as a sign of respect." That's true. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't offend me, but I would much rather someone just use my name instead of in fact, don't use Ms. Neubauer or Mrs. Davison. I have very strong feelings on that one. I would really just prefer people to use my name. So, and these are suggestions. And again, when you are in a group environment where you know everyone, that's certainly going to be very different than if you were standing up in front of the congregation where you don't, or if you were in some kind of business meeting where you don't know everyone. That's very different. Any other comments? Questions? Yes. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. I would say that if someone told you not to, or if they said, "Hey, I don't like that diagram," then obviously you shouldn't use it in the future. I've never heard anyone say anything about the pictures, so I don't have a real good answer for you. I don't think that is a problem, but you never know. I'm so sorry. That was pretty much a terrible answer. So mistakes happen, right? We've all made the mistakes. We're going to make the mistakes again. I probably made a mistake in this presentation, right? What do? You pause, you apologize. You own it. It was your mistake. Just be accountable for your actions, but don't dwell on it. Correct your mistake, resume the conversation, and move forward. What is important is that you are trying, you are making an effort, and you are learning. That's what we do. So, we want to talk about how this affects people, and I think we've gone over that a bit in this presentation, but it allows people to be seen as they want to be seen. It allows them to be treated as they want to be treated. It challenges both our conscious and unconscious biases, which we all have, okay? Everybody knows that, right? We all have unconscious biases. Okay, good. It supports disclosure and declaration. It makes people feel more comfortable and welcome to be around you. And positive language facilitates a collective no-blame culture. So the next slide is really a bunch of resources for style guides that various groups within the government are using to make their own language in their own publications more inclusive. Some of those are NRC specific because this, again, was a work presentation. But you can see here, again, Google. I was having a conversation with, I'm going to say my niece, the other evening, and my niece's pronouns are they, them. So it occurred to me, I can no longer refer to them as my niece, right? Because that implies a feminine gender. I didn't know how to describe this person anymore. So what did I do? I went to Google. I got to tell you, I'm not in love with the answer that Google gave me. I think the languages around niece and nephew as they identify as they, them is evolving. But Google gave me back the term nibbling, which means like nephew, niece combined with sibling. I'm not there yet. I'm not in love with that one. I'm hoping that it evolves to something a little bit better. But this is my point. If you don't know something, and it occurred to me as I'm speaking with them that I can no longer refer to them as my niece, I went to Google. I'm trying to educate myself as this all changes, as it moves forward. And so that's what I highly recommend for you all. If you are still working and employed and you have some of these issues in correspondence, Microsoft Word now has an inclusive tab under their grammar checker. It is not perfect, but it will check your language for you. And the reason we put this in this presentation that we give to employees, because we're like, look, this is your first step. This is the easiest thing you can do, is change your grammar checker, let somebody else do the work for you, and then you can think about it as well. It's not 100%. A friend of mine put in a term that is considered a slur for a transgendered individual, and Microsoft did not pick it up. So it's not 100%, but it is something that you can do that can help you thinking about it going forward. And that's all I have. Anybody have any comments, questions? I know we've been talking as we go. Well, so yes, we should have put that in there with the, when we say don't use non-white, right? Because using the term non-white is, again, establishing this baseline that white is the default. And so, yes, you should use person of color, persons of color, woman of color, or use how that person wants to be identified. In my job, it's very easy. If someone comes in and says that they have been discriminated against on the basis of race, I just ask them what their race is. And some people say, I'm Black. Others say, I'm African American. Some may say, I'm Caucasian or white, and I just take them at face value as to what they identify as. And so I tend to do that, if necessary, outside of my work environment too. But I always just accept how that person describes their race as their race. Yes. Well, white, you can identify, you can say I'm Caucasian, or you can say I'm white. I say I'm white. I don't really like the term Caucasian, but that again, that's just me. Like, I don't like the word folks. Um, but yeah, I mean, however that person identifies themselves as. Anything else? Well, again, thank you so much for letting me present today. This means a lot to me. Um, this is probably the most rewarding work that I have done in my entire career. We are making a difference. It's very small, but those little small actions grow to be bigger actions. And so I am very appreciative for everyone who came. I'm appreciative for everyone who watched on the live stream. I'm very appreciative that you allowed me this opportunity. So thank you.
So we want to thank Meredith. Definitely, this is helpful, especially as we grow in our congregation, as we want to become more hospitable and welcoming of people. I'm learning. Yeah, and one of the things that I'm actually inclusive is using the term siblings, beloved, kind of a more of generic, inclusive people for the community of faith. And sometimes, we're brothers, sisters, but we want to include everybody as siblings in Christ, people that come together as one. So thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you. And I'm glad that we could do this sooner than later, because I think this is all foundation for us as community, as we welcome people and as we engage and invite others to be part of the community as well. So thank you so much. So for now, thank you again. We are ready to go into the world and start applying these steps and growing with them. And I would say, of course, we're here at the church, so receive the blessing. And the blessing comes from the grace, from God our Creator, from the Jesus Christ, the Son, that allows for us to be more like and grow more in our loving relationships, and from the presence of the Holy Spirit that empower us and gift us with grace as we relate to one another and as we welcome the community. So go in peace and let's do the work. Thank you, Meredith. Blessings.